Hello, my name Borat. Hello, my name Borat. Hello, my name Borat. Hello, my name Borat. Man, I really cannot fucking pull this off. Hello, my name Borat, and today we shall discuss how a xenophobic, problematic, and rather absurd depiction of a Kazakh man can serve us greatly in showcasing ideas of American exceptionalism, as well as deep-rooted cultural problems facing the only country in the world that thinks of itself as the greatest country in the world. No, not Kazakhstan, but the good old US of A.
I get them. Please relax. I get them.
The movie opens in a small Kazakh village, or that's at least what we're led to believe. In reality, it's an impoverished, tiny Romanian settlement populated by an ethnic minority of Romania and the wider Balkans, the Roma. Borat proceeds to walk us through the everyday life of a Kazakh. He talks about his neighbor, about his sister, who is second best prostitute in all of Kazakhstan, and proceeds to introduce us to his and his cows' home as we're led to a goodbye party by his fellow countrymen, which they have organized for him because Borat's going to the promised land. Now, what I find absolutely fascinating is that from the get-go, intentionally or not, we see how the Western viewership, which was objectively the target of the movie, allows through its ignorance an absurd amount of manipulation by the film crew. The makers of the film understood that a typical 2006 to 2007 Western man or woman can't possibly know the difference between Roma people in Romania and fucking Kazakhs half the world over. The movie could have very easily been about Borat from India, and if they had shot the exact same scenes and changed Kazakhstan with India, nobody would have been the wiser, except for the woke crowd calling it blackface because cultural mockery only applies to people with more melanin, I guess. It's my strong belief that only one country so profoundly absorbed in their own self-importance could manage to be the big, beautiful set of the now classic Borat experience. America. I've read through more articles on Borat in the last few weeks than any man should do in a lifetime, and I believe I have a good idea of which parts of the show were completely scripted, with actors and all that stuff, and which weren't. But still, there's debate about some of them, and I apologize in advance if I present a scene as reality, when in fact it isn't. I promise you I didn't intend it, comrade. Before completely diving in, I'd like to share a very personal story of mine. Let's call it my own Borat experience. You know, I'm not a stranger to travel, and I was lucky enough to visit a bundle of Western and Eastern European countries and a few in the Middle East. People varied from kind to significantly annoyed by my presence, but all of them interacted with me and treated me not as a different species, but as a human. It was only until I went to the States for the first time that I got to experience something, different. You see, I was sent there on a program to earn money for university by working different service jobs. It's called work and travel. I cleaned dishes, I was a prep cook, and I worked as a cashier. Around 13 hours every day with a day off every other week. It was extremely interesting to me that I went to this country to do jobs almost nobody wanted to, and yet it was very visibly expected of me to be thankful to the boss and my American colleagues for this minimal wage job I flew over an ocean for. It didn't take long to understand why. You see, there were a few cool people, mostly young with an open mind, but the absolute majority of my Yank counterparts viewed me as some sort of underdeveloped work hog. A work hog that came from a place where we just drink vodka and 70% of the population is either jobless or in the mob, and where all the women are either prostitutes or mail order brides. You know, it's like when you talk to kids and no matter what they say at like the age of 8, you nod and you tap them on the head and you squeeze their little cheek or something. Well, I felt like the 8-year-old. No matter what the quote-unquote imported crew did, we were sat down and had everything explained to us like we're people who grew up in a cave with no electricity. The amount of patronizing I've experienced angers me to this day. We were seen as workhorses, and even worse, workhorses which should be grateful. And that brings me to the point which we can explore through Borat. These American bosses and colleagues of mine were not necessarily bad people, but they have been so profoundly brainwashed by this idea that the US is pretty much the whole planet, and that their interactions with a non-Brit or Frenchman or some other cliche fucking nationality immediately evokes a sense of patronizing superiority. This might sound overblown, but when you're asked if you know what Coca-Cola is, or if there are phones where you're from, or if you still ride horses, I can tell you, comrades, it hurts. It fucking hurts.
So what, you like the bitches out there in the fucking old Russia there?
What?
The bitches in the old Russia.
How are the
What
women in
the
Russia?
The
How are the
women.
women?
It's the fucking hoes, baby.
How about the
The
women?
fucking girls. You fuck the shit out of them.
Yeah.
And then you never call them again.
Why you don't call them? Because they do not have a telephone, yes?
No, not because of that.
They don't have my
Definitely not 'cause of
respect,
that.
you know? I mean,
Let me ask you this. Are women your slaves in Russia?
No. Do you have slaves here?
We
No
wish.
slaves. No
We
slaves.
wish.
Here we have two classes of Americans we've talked about. One is vicious, typical, disgusting and debased, exemplified by the frat boys. They show incredible amounts of misogyny accompanied by rampant xenophobic sentiment. These are the USA, USA, USA crowd. These are the red hats.
Excuse me, is it possible to go and do a how you say in the
Upstairs.
how
Just
you
say,
say it?
excuse me a moment.
I need to
That
do
works.
what
Thank
you
you.
say
Thank you.
in
you go upstairs?
yes, thank you.
I think that the cultural differences are vast.
Exactly.
And I think he's a delightful man, and it wouldn't take very much time for him to really become Americanized.
Thank you very much. I feel much better. Cindy, where shall I put this?
Just,
Where shall I put this?
oh,
Maybe in the other restroom down
In
here.
in the,
where I do not
excuse me for just a moment, please.
On the other side of the spectrum, we have the upper-class Christian mums, who might not inherently look at you as inferior, but instead blame your non-Americanness for your silly cultural lackings, like not knowing how to use a toilet. God, she actually fucking believed a 21st century human who knows how to tie a tie doesn't know how to take a govno, how to jebem ti mater, how to take a shit.
Roll off like this, and you wipe your bottom, and you put the paper. Look, you
wipe
no, I
mine?
don't. You do. This
The-
is
the-
this is a very
the
private
host,
thing.
The host clean
No, no,
the
no, no,
anus of the
no,
other?
no, 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 no. Nobody touches you except you.
So, we need to make sure to segment these two groups between bigoted American white people and the ignorant American white people. Because the bigot comes from a place of hate and actively chooses to look at others as lessers, while the sweet upper-class older lady represents a place of misunderstanding and maybe even misinterpretation. The distinction is important for many practical reasons, what many would call praxis. Ignorance is a passive state, while hatred is not. Therefore, when one goes about changing people's minds, they should always remember that the character and, shall we say, category of people they're talking to. This does not excuse anyone's actions, God forbid, especially in this day and age where access to information is easier than ever, but denying that there are vast and sometimes differing shades of American conservatives would be mildly said completely brain dead. So okay, jebem ti mater Yugopnik, where is this going? Well, even though internal, American power dynamics are very important and interesting, and they're definitely in the mainstream of everything that can be defined as political discourse. So let's do ourselves a favor and spice things up a bit. I'd like to suggest that we look in from the outside, the way our pal Borat does.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Race, gender, class, culture, religion, and many other categories shape the way we see our world and the way we see ourselves. There's no corner on this globe where these topics aren't discussed, but the overencompassing concept of Americanism, or better yet, American exceptionalism, is limited to only one place in the world. This mixes up all the other categories, and we end up having a pretty decent number of people who believe in human rights, but at home, inequality among races, but just at home, freedom to personal identity, but just at home, right to a free press, but just, oh come on, I think you get it by now. You see, the American liberal and conservative are a special kind of breed. They see privilege and power and exploitation, but mostly in the United States. While the rest of the world, simply put, kind of doesn't count.
This thing gets over with, and when we win it and kick the butts over there,
Yes.
and all of them son of a butts hanging from the gallows,
Yes.
by that time you will have proven yourself and they'll understand you'll be accepted.
This has been perfectly exemplified by the recent Iranian situation, where one of their top brass had been ruthlessly assassinated by the American Republican Party. It's always been absolutely incredible to me that the concept of some other national committing violence against fully enlisted American soldiers is seen as morally unacceptable under any circumstance. The US started a conflict, and yet any retribution against the world police will always be seen as an act of terror. Not only that, but using violence at home to solve anything, especially in protests, is seen as detestable and void of American values, while bombing Iran because women have limited rights seems to be the go-to option for American centrists and hell, even liberals. But fuck that, let's go back to Borat. This crazy Kurvin scene went to visit one of America's greatest and oldest traditions, grown men getting on a terrified and angry bull and riding it around. After deeply messing around with a few Burgerlandians, he had the balls to do this.
To show our friendship, I now will sing our Kazakh national anthem to the tune of your national anthem. Please stand. Kazakhstan is the greatest country in the world. All other countries are run by little girls. Kazakhstan is #1 exporter of potassium. Other Central Asian countries have inferior potassium. Kazakhstan is the greatest country in the world. All other countries is the home of the gays.
Now imagine the same scene, but he just never said Kazakhstan. Imagine he sang about the US. He'd get the biggest fucking applause those inbred trucker hat wearing hillbillies have ever heard. Stating that America is #1 is kind of a given at this point, isn't it? Even though it's not #1 in almost all the categories that matter, saying it ain't numero uno America da da da, fuck me daddy, would rile up any Burgerlandian out there. I think you know where I'm going with this. American exceptionalism undresses and makes acceptable concepts that otherwise would not be anywhere else. Believing you are superior and your culture is superior and that you are God's chosen people put on this earth to lead the rest of us to prosperity, no joke, only exists in the American mainstream and, I don't know, far, 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 far right movements in the rest of the world. When you see Borat saying,
Kazakhstan is the greatest country in the world.
I'm sorry, but you're looking at a caricature of an American. Most other countries see you the way you see Borat. And I don't want to shame you, fuck that. I just want to introduce another point of view to your obesity-stricken nation. Please try to learn how to spot shameless acts of jingoism, stereotyping, and a good old sense of American superiority, and call it out the same way you call people out on other issues. I'm not out here saying you all suck. Hell, I think you have potential, the way the few good young colleagues of mine had back when I visited your beautifully uneducated nation. Don't look back at greater America that never even existed. Instead, take your culture and move it into what actually makes the American experiment so interesting and profound. It's not world dominance, not constitutional democracy, or burgers and fireworks, but the idea that people of all cultures can coexist. The ideas of the International. In conclusion, any and all progressives, leftists, or just people who want to move things to the better should always carry a bit of skepticism in them when it comes to their national belonging. Sure, anthems and flags are fun and colorful, but sometimes, well, the red on the flag is not paint. Now that I've guilt-tripped you over something you have absolutely no control over, your nationality, I'll feel much better about e-begging. I would like to announce that I've launched my Patreon page. And guys, I really like doing this, and I'd like to continue doing this, but earning money in the developing world, as you probably know, is far from easy. Other than my main job, I do side gigs which end up filling up my entire day. I'm hoping that through your benevolent help, I might be able to throw out some of those side gigs and dedicate a lot more time to pushing out content. This way, I can hopefully increase the quality of my content and how often I post. Any contribution would be greatly appreciated. And if you can't, drop a like, I still love you. Thank you again for watching, and till the next time. Tavarishi.